You know, there comes a peculiar moment in life when you begin to feel that you're no longer the same person who once rushed through the crowd. It's as if the lights of the city are still blazing, the music still plays, but you have somehow stepped just half a pace outside of it all. You're watching rather than participating, hearing rather than reacting, and it dawns on you, perhaps with a shiver, that something inside has quietly awakened. Now then, awakening isn't like some grand trumpet blast from the heavens. It's more like waking up in a darkened theater long after the movie has ended. The credits have rolled, the audience is gone, and suddenly you realize the story you were living was never entirely real. It was a projection, beautifully convincing, terribly dramatic, but a projection nonetheless. And when that happens, you see, everything changes. The people you once called friends, companions, lovers, sometimes begin to sound a little off-key. Not wrong, mind you, just tuned to a different frequency. You hear the laughter, but it doesn't echo the same way. You feel the conversations, but something in you notices the acting. And within that noticing, there is a subtle peace, as though the universe were inviting you to breathe differently, to see with quieter eyes. Now this is where it gets tricky, because once you begin to awaken, to truly see through the play, you must also begin to choose your company with extraordinary care, not out of arrogance, oh no, but out of a deep sense of responsibility for your own clarity. There are certain kinds of people, you see, whose energy, whose unconscious patterns can tug you right back into the dream you're trying to wake from. And that perhaps is the first quiet challenge of awakening. Realizing that love doesn't always mean closeness and compassion, doesn't always mean involvement. So today, let's wander together through a little contemplation. I like to call 5 people you must avoid after awakening. It isn't a moral list or a set of commandments. Think of it rather as an art, the art of keeping one's flame steady while walking through a world full of wind. Because the more you awaken, the more you will see that this life isn't about fighting darkness, it's about protecting the light that's been entrusted to you. And sometimes you protect that light not by preaching, not by proving, but simply by stepping away softly, silently, lovingly. In this way, awakening becomes less of a destination and more of a gentle unfolding. Now let's begin with the first kind of person you must learn to avoid. Now then, the first kind of person to avoid after awakening is what I'd call the sleeper, who insists that you're dreaming. You see, there are people who've built their entire identity around the idea that the world is exactly as it appears. Their safety depends on certainty, the rules are fixed, the meanings prepackaged, and everything must fit neatly into their little boxes like socks in a drawer. They find comfort in conclusions and anxiety in questions. So when you begin to speak of life as a kind of dance, of realizing that what we call I is not separate from what we call universe, well, it rattles the furniture of their mind. To them it sounds like blasphemy. And because it does, they'll try, often kindly, tuck you back under the blanket of their shared sleep. Be reasonable, they'll say. Grow up. Don't think too much. But what they really mean is, come back to where it's safe, where we all agree that we know what's going on. Isn't it funny how threatened people can be by another's freedom? It's as though someone still dreaming resents the fellow who woke up and opened the window. The light's too bright, the air's too fresh. So they'll call you strange, lost, or arrogant. Anything to keep the window shut. Now you must understand, there's no need to argue. The moment you try to prove you've awakened, you're already half asleep. The awakened have nothing to defend. For truth, you see, is like a cat. It doesn't come when it's called. So what do you do with such people? You bow inwardly with compassion. Let them keep their dream until they're ready to wake. And you quietly keep your eyes open. You don't need to convince anyone of your clarity. Just live it. Let it hum softly in your being. Because genuine awareness radiates without effort, like sunlight through a thin curtain. When you stop explaining your awakening to those who cannot yet hear it, your peace deepens. You stop spilling your wine into broken cups. And then you find that silence becomes your greatest ally. Not the silence of avoidance, but the silence of understanding. Now then, once you've stepped back from the sleeper who insists you're dreaming, you'll notice another kind of person, subtler and far more seductive. Ah yes, the second kind. This one's trickier because unlike the first, they seem to be awake, They use the same words: energy, vibration, oneness. They quote scriptures, speak of consciousness, maybe burn a little incense and say namaste. But you see, their awakening is still caught in the mirror of the ego. These are the performers of spirituality. They wear entantu like a badge, or worse, a costume, and the moment you speak with them, you can feel it. That faint undercurrent of comparison. It's no longer about truth, but about who's further along. Isn't that curious? To measure the immeasurable, to turn awakening into a kind of competition, like sprinters racing to cross the finish line of no self. You'll recognize them easily. Every conversation becomes a subtle contest of holiness. If you're peaceful, they are more peaceful. If you whisper, they whisper softer, as though enlightenment were a matter of decibels. They mean well, but their ego, that old actor, has only changed costumes and learned a few spiritual lines. It's like the ego slipped in through the back door and declared itself enlightened. And the real danger, you see, isn't that they fool you. It's that they tempt you. You'll start performing again. Suddenly you're asking, am I doing it right? Am I spiritual enough? Should I post my meditation corner online? And just like that, the infinite becomes a selfie. True awakening, however, has nothing to do with appearance. It's as plain as breathing, as simple as washing the dishes. Stillness doesn't boast or advertise itself. It simply is. So, the wise thing to do with such people is to smile and keep your inner robe hidden. Don't unmask them. The mask will fall away in time. But don't linger either, for comparison is a slow poison. It turns the temple of being into a marketplace. You see, the awakened life isn't a brand. It's the end of branding altogether. It's not about being better than those who sleep. It's about realizing there's no better at all, only different stages of remembering. Now then, after you've seen through the performers, you'll meet another sort. One who doesn't preach or compete yet can quietly drain the breath from your presence. The third kind of person to avoid after awakening is what I'd call the emotional vampire cloaked in need. You see, awakening softens you. It makes you porous, sensitive, tender to life. You begin to feel more the sorrow of others, the tremors of the world, the quiet despair that hides behind small talk. And because of that tenderness, there's always the danger of becoming a magnet for those who feed on light without realizing it. These are not bad people. No more than a moth is bad for flying toward a flame. But if you let every moth into your lantern, soon there'll be no flame left at all. Now, the emotional vampire is subtle. They arrive with stories that never end, wounds that never heal, dramas that replay like old records of self-pity. They say, you understand me like no one else. And perhaps you do. But you see, understanding doesn't mean absorption. Isn't it funny how compassion, if left unguarded, turns into servitude? You start thinking that being loving means saying yes all the time, that to be spiritual is to be endlessly available. But love, real love, isn't blind generosity. It's intelligent warmth. It knows when to open its arms and when to step back into silence. When you're around such people, pay attention to your energy. Do you feel nourished or drained, calm or compressed? Your body often knows before your mind does. The soul has its own immune system, and exhaustion is its fever. And the most compassionate act you can offer those who drain you is refusal, not rejection. Refusal to say, I will not help you destroy yourself by letting you destroy my peace. That is love, wearing the armor of wisdom. Now don't go around cutting everyone off and declaring them vampires. That's another ego trick. Instead, learn the fine art of distance, the sacred pause, the gentle no. You see, if you wish to keep walking toward the light, you can't carry everyone who insists on living in the dark. Sometimes you must leave them with their candles unlit, not out of cruelty, but out of trust that one day they'll find the match themselves. And once you've learned that balance between compassion and self-preservation, you'll soon meet the fourth kind, perhaps the most dangerous of all, for they hide not in darkness, but in the guise of reason. Now, the fourth kind of person to avoid after awakening is the rational cynic, the one who mistakes skepticism for intelligence and confusion for depth. You see, awakening isn't anti-reason. It's reason that has learned to laugh at itself. But the cynic, poor fellow, laughs, takes his mind far too seriously. He carries it like a sword, slashing every mystery into pieces until nothing remains but sawdust. He is the kind who hears a bird singing and demands to see its credentials. Such a person cannot stand uncertainty. So he wraps himself in the armor of intellect. He dissects love into hormones, beauty into biology, spirit into superstition. And though he claims to seek truth, what he really seeks is control, the security of knowing, the comfort of certainty. Now then, isn't it funny? The cynic is often just the disappointed idealist, someone who once hoped deeply, was hurt, and decided never to hope again. So he sneers at your wonder, not because it's wrong, but because it reminds him of his own lost innocence. And if you linger too long in his company, you may find your own flame of wonder growing dim. He'll persuade you that to see beauty is naive, that to trust life is foolish, that to dance without purpose is madness. You begin to shrink yourself to fit the small cage of his logic, until you've forgotten that you were born to fly, not to explain your rings. The wise thing then is not to argue. Don't try to convince the cynic of magic. That's like trying to sell water to a fish. Simply smile, bow to his cleverness, and walk on. The universe doesn't need defending. In the end, reason is a tool, not a throne. It's meant to serve awareness, not replace it. To awaken is to rediscover the laughter behind the equations, the cosmic joke that cannot be solved, only lived. So, my friend, guard your wonder as you would guard a rare jewel. Keep it polished and free from the dust of sarcasm. Because once wonder dies, wisdom turns to ashes. And when you've learned to walk past the cynic with your laughter intact, you'll meet the fifth kind of person, the most seductive illusion of all, the rescuer of souls. The fifth kind, the rescuer of souls, the one who wishes to save everyone and in doing so quietly feeds their own need to feel necessary. You will meet them often after awakening, for they are drawn to light like sailors to a distant lighthouse. They'll say things like, "You're meant to help me," or "You're the only one who understands." And perhaps you do understand, but that, you see, is precisely the trap. Because the rescuer is addicted to fixing, to mending, to being the hero of someone else's story. Their love hides a subtle bargain. I will heal you so that I may feel whole. And if you're not careful, you will find yourself cast in their endless play. The saint who must keep shining so they can keep worshipping. Now then, the awakened soul must learn this sacred truth. You cannot rescue anyone from a dream they are still enjoying. Every being wakes up in their own time, by the friction of their own suffering. To interfere is to rob them of the very lesson that will set them free. Isn't it funny how the ego can disguise itself as compassion? You start believing that your peace depends on everyone else finding theirs, when in fact peace only multiplies when left unforced. The sun doesn't chase shadows. It simply shines in the dark. You know, there comes a peculiar moment in life when you begin to feel that you're no longer the same person who once rushed through the crowd. It's as if the lights of the city are still blazing. The music still plays, but you have somehow stepped just half a pace outside of it all. You're watching rather than participating, hearing rather than reacting, and it dawns on you, perhaps with a shiver, that something inside has quietly awakened. Now then, awakening isn't like some grand trumpet blast from the heavens. It's more like waking up in a darkened theater, long after the movie has ended. The credits have rolled, the audience is gone, and suddenly you realize the story you were living was never entirely real. It was a projection, beautifully convincing, terribly dramatic, but a projection nonetheless. And when that happens, you see, everything changes. The people you once called friends,